We're here tonight for a very simple reason with a very simple proposition, that the American people deserve to know about the origins of COVID-19. They deserve to know how this terrible pandemic that has ravaged the globe and our country, how it got started, and what China's role was in starting it. Now, we've seen a parade of government officials speculate about the origins in one place or another, and there's increasing speculation and indeed increasing numbers of statements from government officials saying that perhaps this virus originated in a Chinese lab, in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Well, I think it's time that the American people got to decide for themselves. It's time that they actually got to see the evidence that the United States government has collected on this issue. And that is exactly what the measure that we are introducing here tonight would do.
S. 1867, a bill to require the Director of National Intelligence to declassify information relating to the origin of COVID-19 and for other purposes.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I thank the Senate for this action tonight. This is, as Senator Braun said, an important first step. It's only a first step, but the truth is always the right step. And that's the action that we've taken tonight.
Most coronaviruses that we know of are of origin from, that have infected the population, SARS-CoV-1, MERS, generally come from an animal origin. And
are there any other possibilities?
Certainly a lab-based origin is one possibility.
We've heard a lot recently about the fact that maybe the virus did start in a lab. Let's talk about that. The fact that there is this lab, I think it's the only one in the world quite like it, in Wuhan, where it started. It would almost be a conspiracy theory to think it didn't start in a lab.
You would think.
Right? And that theory was demonized at first, that, oh, it can't, that, come on, that's conspiracy thinking, that it would started in a lab. But it certainly is a 50-50, would you say that?
Oh, it's far more likely than that. As a matter of fact,
right.
I said, I think in June, that the chances that it came from the lab looked to me to be about 90%.
Okay.
So this was never a conspiracy theory. In fact, that term is simply used to make it go away. It's an obvious hypothesis that is in need of testing, and we are only now, a year in, getting to the point where we can discuss it out loud without being stigmatized.
Okay.
A big part of the problem, of course, is that we are so politicized, we're so polarized and partisan now as a country that if the wrong guy proposed this to begin with, and for half the country it was the wrong guy, then the rest of the country says, no way, no how, we're going to call that a conspiracy theory, and we're never going to revisit it. And the fact is that's not how science works. That is not science. You need to say, I've got a pattern, I'm going to make some observations, and I'm going to consider every possible explanation on the table. And did it leak from a lab? That was clearly from the beginning a possibility.
Yeah. Say, you know what? Donald Trump and his Secretary of State are out talking about this thing. These people are surely crazy. They're political zealots. They want a shiny object. I heard all the different stories. But of course, as we unpack it, as we accumulate data, science, evidence, facts, it's more clear than ever that the virus came from this laboratory.
In early 2020, the medical journal The Lancet published a letter from a group of scientists saying the lab leak was a conspiracy. The man behind the letter was Peter Daszak. He's the president of EcoHealth Alliance, and he'd been working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology for 15 years, sending US grant money to Wuhan for bat research.
And that he assures us that the Chinese had provided him personally with proof to make it clear that this had come out of nature. But when we asked for this proof, when we asked the government agencies that had funded the work of EcoHealth and others, they couldn't give us that proof because they didn't have that proof.
The possibility of a bat in the wild markets in Wuhan having been the source of COVID-19, scientifically, that has really no merit because it can't infect bats. So it couldn't have come straight across from a bat if it can't infect a bat.
在过去的30多年里，新发和突发传染病在全球范围内呈现出扩散趋势。特别是自2003年以来，相继爆发的 SARS、高致病性禽流感、埃博拉等。
This video was part of the official launch of the Wuhan Institute of Virology's latest lab, BSL-4. It clearly shows there were bats in the lab. And that's a fact World Health Organization investigators said was a conspiracy. In terms of coronavirus research, what was going on in the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Well, so what we do know, I mean, is that they were one of the world's leading repository of coronaviruses.
That research was headed up by Shozheng Li. They call her the Batwoman. She's China's top virologist, and her specialty, bat viruses.
So it does look like COVID-19, at some point did originate as a bat virus. That I think most people would accept that as a premise. The question then is more about how did those changes occur that make it unique and that make it so well adapted to humans.
In 2012, Shozheng Li hit pay dirt. At a disused mine in southwestern China, 6 workers fell ill after clearing away bat manure. 3 died from a coronavirus. But Beijing covered it up and told no one.
To a virologist obsessed with SARS-like viruses, that mine was a gold mine, pardon the pun, for new viruses to study. And they've returned to it at least 5 times, the Mojiang mine. That's what Xi Jinping has been doing for 2 decades. She's been going around various bat caves, mostly in Yunnan, China, and collecting bat viruses.
Hundreds of samples were brought back to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There, scientists were slicing, manipulating, and combining genetic sequences from different viruses together.
The story of the mine's intriguing, one, because most of us only first learnt about it, in early 2020, when the Wuhan Institute of Virology said, we've gone to all the viruses, coronaviruses we've got stored in the lab to look to see, did we actually have COVID-19 in our repository? And then they said, we didn't find, COVID-19, but hey presto, we found the very closest genetic relative to this, which is rat G13. Here it is.
RATG13 is the name of one coronavirus they extracted from the bats in those caves. It is 96.2% identical to the virus that causes COVID-19.
Then the natural question is, did they find COVID-19 on one of those trips? And if so, why haven't they told us about it? Or did they manipulate, rat G13 or one of the other coronaviruses that they found in this cave, and that created COVID-19? And of course, that always raises the question, well, how far did they push the boundaries? What research were they doing?
Before the pandemic, much of the world had never heard of the term gain of function. Put simply, it's genetically manipulating a virus to give it new functions, like the ability to infect humans. That's what was happening inside the Wuhan lab.
It raises the question, should we ever be studying viruses in labs this way, if we're just going to create the problem that we're trying to?
Well, that battle was taking place before the COVID-19 epidemic. There were 2 factions. There was a faction that said we had no choice but to study these viruses and, in fact, to engage in what's called gain-of-function research, where we turbocharge the viruses and make them much more dangerous than they are in the condition we find them. And the argument was that we had to do that in order to know what they would be like in their dangerous form and could perhaps prepare by generating a vaccine. And then there was another faction that said, actually, we're likely to create exactly the disaster we fear. And what was missing from this discussion was a proper evolutionary analysis. Now, the fact is, there are lots of viruses that can escape from nature and infect people, but in general, they don't have a second trick. That is to say, they can infect you, they can make you sick, maybe they can kill you, but they can't jump to the next person. And so what's really conspicuous about this virus is that it had both tricks from the get-go. It infects people and it jumps from one person to the next with no explanation.
If COVID-19 was the result of gain-of-function or other risky experiments at the Wuhan lab, remember this: that same lab was being partly funded by America.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement.
Take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans,
right.
You're saying that's not gain-of-function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly, and I want to say that officially.
Dr. Anthony Fauci is America's top medical advisor. I found a scientific paper he wrote in 2012, where he argued the benefits of gain-of-function research were worth the risk of a pandemic. In total, American agencies funded 65 research projects at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
So you don't want to go to Hoboken, New Jersey, or to Fairfax, Virginia, to be studying the bat-human interface that might lead to an outbreak. So you go to China.
Peter Daszak is his name. He's from Britain. He sent this email in April of last year. I just wanted to say a personal thank you on behalf of our staff and collaborators for publicly standing up and stating that the scientific evidence supports a natural for COVID-19 from a bat to human spillover, not a lab release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. From my perspective, your comments are brave, and coming from your trusted voice, it will help dispel the myths being spun around the virus's origin.
These emails show that in the very early stages of the pandemic, in early 2020, he became concerned that the funding for gain-of-function research in the US had flown to Wuhan. And we see there's a flurry of emails where he's trying to find out whether he could be responsible or whether the NIH could be responsible for funding the research that might have created the virus that has leaked. And Chris, this is a real possibility. This is why we've seen such a cover-up from people like Anthony Fauci. If it was a laboratory leak, then you're looking at a situation where American funding under Anthony Fauci funded a virus that might have leaked that has resulted in this global pandemic. It is a scandal.
From a scientist, Christian Anderson, it goes to Dr. Anthony Fauci. It says that there are some features of the virus that look engineered. It also goes on to say that there are features of the virus that are inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. In other words, it looks like this vaccine could have been tampered with in the lab. Now, that scientist apparently later on decided that that was not the case, that it was natural. But it proves that this idea of a laboratory tampered vaccine was in play at the most senior levels in the US way back in February last year.
And yet we were never told about this.
COVID-19 is like a Frankenstein virus, and it looked to many scientists like it had been cobbled together, because it has a bat virus backbone with a pangolin virus spike protein and a unique furin cleavage site in the same spot where Chinese scientists were genetically tweaking viruses.
This was really just some naturally occurring virus because someone ate a bat from a wet market. China wouldn't have done the things that they did. The Chinese Communist Party would not have shut down Wuhan. They would not have silenced doctors and scientists and journalists and disappeared some of them.
And it's not only people that go missing. On the 12th of September 2019, The virus database at the Wuhan Institute of Virology was taken offline. 22,000 coronavirus samples gone. And that very same day, the Institute beefed up its security and issued a tender to replace its air conditioning system. This, in September, is when the evidence suggests a leak first occurred. What does that indicate to you about the origins of the virus and whether an outbreak might have occurred or become known to the Wuhan Institute of Virology at that early date?
So I've seen data points that place it in the summertime of 2019, late summer, July, August of 2019. These are all parts of the pieces, right? This is all the cumulative weight of the evidence that suggests that it did come from this lab.
And a month later, the Institute went into a communications blackout. There was no cell phone or signals activity on the compound for about 2 weeks.
Now, Hubei is the province, where Wuhan city is located. And Hubei was buying PCR tests as early as May 2019. Not a small number, but PCR tests worth millions of dollars. I repeat, in May 2019. And we all know that China announced its first confirmed infections only in December. Information in China, is very tough to access, and information on how the pandemic began is well nigh impossible to access. Ask the WHO team or the American intelligence agencies. They all conducted investigations into the origins and came up with virtually nothing.
SARS, we knew the host in 4 months. MERS, we knew the host in 9. We still don't know the host for COVID, even though, and China's not being transparent about it, even though they have a vested interest in producing the host, so they can put all those down. In a lab that we know is involved in changing viruses synthetically so that they become infectious for humans. In a lab that diplomats have told us is unsafe, in a country that had a history of lab leaks. And by the way, in a virus that we know can be synthetically created because the Swiss did it. The Swiss created an exact replica of this virus in the lab for purposes of answering it. All of these facts were available to us last May, last April. Why? I'll start with Dr. Fauci. Why did you dismiss the lab leak theory as credible?
I have always said that the high likelihood is that this is a natural occurrence. I didn't dismiss anything. I just said it's a high likelihood that this is a natural occurrence from the environment of an animal reservoir that we have not yet identified. Well, and I still maintain that. But as I just mentioned in response to other questions, that since you don't know 100% about that, because no one knows, including me, 100%, what the origin is the reason why we're in favor of further investigation.
I've seen very little evidence to date that there was a broad-based information exchange before the decision was made by Dr. Fauci to lift that ban on gain-of-function research.
The expectation amongst those who have been seriously investigating the question of whether this is a gain-of-function lab escape virus is that the virus would have been passed through either animals in the lab or tissues in the lab in order to use evolution to re-rig it. And that means that effectively tension was put on the virus, pulling in the direction of certain things. Some of those things were intentional, like infectivity of human cells, which may have given it extra capacities like this furin cleavage site that no other virus like this has, but SARS-CoV-2 does. So in any case, in an attempt to give it these extra capacities, lots of things will have been inflicted on the virus, including things that we don't think about. So many of the characteristics, the fact that this virus attacks so many different tissues in the body does not seem natural. The fact that it does not, at least at the beginning, did not seem to transmit outdoors nearly at all is very conspicuous. I mean, after all, most animals live outdoors. So a virus that seems to be adapted to indoor transmission is a bit conspicuous in this case.
He's the former head of the British spy agency, MI6. Early in the pandemic, 2 scientists asked for his help in publishing a paper that cast doubt on COVID-19 coming from an infected animal.
We approached nature, we approached science, we approached
the American Journal of Virology, we approached various publications in the UK, and it was clear to me that there was a sort of united front not to put anything in the public domain which questioned the Chinese narrative.
Another paper that struggled to find a home was from Professor Petrovsky. His research found the virus was better adapted to infect humans than any other animal, including bats.
And so we were quite stunned when we just got rejection after rejection after rejection without even the paper being looked at.
We know that Facebook recently reversed their decision on taking down any kind of information that said it came from the lab in Wuhan.
My whole point is there are people out there who had Facebook posts taken down, were called kooks, conspiracy theorists, for saying publicly a year ago what we now say may be possible. And I think those people deserve an apology at a minimum. Thank you.
As to the possibility of COVID-19 coming from a lab, the WHO report found it extremely unlikely.
Oh, it's a complete fiasco, the report. You know, it's 413 pages long, and only 3 pages are devoted to the possibility that we're dealing with a lab escapee.
There were 14 American diplomats on the ground in Wuhan at this time who were watching and observing what was taking place inside of Wuhan. I hope one day that we'll be able to get that information out more broadly, but as I come back to it, the cumulative evidence that one could see points singularly to the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Is there still major intelligence that goes to proving the virus came out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology that's still not in the public domain?
Yes, there's compelling intelligence that hasn't been declassified.
I had people saying to me, Richard, my strong advice is you don't get involved in this issue. You know, it's conspiracy theory. And I mean, my reply to them was, you know, if that's what you really think, you haven't really looked at the science. You don't understand the arguments. And I suggest you go back and delve into this a bit more deeply, because you're going to find some pretty strange things when you do.
The people that had the most access to the most intelligence are telling you that the most likely origin of COVID-19, of the Wuhan virus, was what happened, was a lab leak at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This is really most likely what happened, and it's more than just a possibility. It's certainly a probability, and it's probably a certainty.
It's like when the busboy doesn't wash his hands before he goes to the bathroom, and, you know, then you get food poisoning. But for the whole world.
Right.
Right, that's what happened. Okay.